discussion about scientific research. Today we're going to flip the page and turn into another kind of research, which is called qualitative research. If some of you have attended the previous discussions, I said that there is a misunderstanding in terms of, or from the part of Iraqi researchers. They think that when they do questionnaires, surveys, and they start interpret the results of their studies, they think that the interpretation, since they gather all the statistical results from the professional persons, they think that when they get these results and they start talking about them in terms of words, just like they are doing qualitative research. Well, I hope that the idea will be clarified that qualitative research is totally different. They only know the time or the term of this method, but the picture is vague. Qualitative research is totally different from interpreting numbers, interpreting quantitative research. And today we're going to discuss the different approaches of qualitative research. And just like a start, the idea of having all these kinds of research, because we as human beings, our mentalities differ. There are people who prefer playing with numbers, doing research with numbers. We call them number people, numbers people. The other kind, the people who don't like numbers, just like the division in high school, we have the scientific version and the literary version. Is just like the same idea, but in a different level. So we have researchers who like to do numbers. They say this is easier for me. I enjoy this process. And we have the opposite. We have people who don't like doing numbers. That's why they tend to go and search, use different approaches in order to discuss their or investigate their topics. The type of research they do, we call it qualitative research. I think, in my point of view, or let's put it this way, away from my perspective, the every time whenever we tackle or we deal with subjects, we have subjective way and objective way. And I mentioned once previously in the series that Iraqi researchers, we, or including me, we are taught in a way that says research is collecting information, collecting ideas from scholars, from different resources, and we paraphrase them. Well, this is, it's again, it's one kind of research which is not preferable now in the world, but it is not a very good way of doing research, in fact. We can do that in the literary part and the literature review, in each part of the study. The real research is that what are we going to add to the field of a study? Where can we find our voice in this process, which is missing in the academic field in Iraq? They say, don't use I, including me. I've heard that several times from my professors, with my total respect to them. Well, no, this is not right. But again, to some extent, this I will be less in quantitative studies, because quantitative studies, it's all the points of view of people, of the samples, translated into numbers. So we are going just to collect this data and organize it and talk about this organization. The situation is totally different with the qualitative research. Any qualitative research, which is why I think it is more fun, qualitative research, it puts you as a researcher inside the world. So you will be surrounded by everything. And then you are going to observe. You are going to see pictures. You are going to see documents. You are going to face people face to face. You will have interviews with them. So this kind of communication will make you part of the process itself. So from now and then, in the discussion, you are going to speak you are going to give your point of view, because there are different kinds of views, and then you have to organize. You have to say, this comes here, this comes here, I think this, I think that. So your voice will be more prominent in qualitative research. So qualitative research, it locates the researcher inside the world, in reality. What is also unique about this kind of approach is that it turns the world into series of representations. And I said, just like my example now. So imagine yourself standing in the middle and you have everything around you. All the things that surrounds you will be representations of resources or sources of data. Everything around you will be a source of data. For example, in your house, even yourself, in one of the papers that I submitted when I was a PhD student, I was the sample of the study, because I mean, I was a teacher myself. So when I give my point of view, I'll be a participant also. So I have the questions for myself and then I answered them. In other studies, I have my colleagues, they did the interview with me, and then I answered the questions also, because I have a voice. I have a point of view. So including myself, I am one of the samples that I can use in my research papers. So everything around you. Sometimes pictures, you can study the history of a family, for example, or a history of a process. You can use pictures. Documents, we do that a lot when as teachers of English. So we collect, for example, the papers, test papers, the exam papers of our students, and then we start analyzing their answers, how they answered. And I mean, this is related to the topic of the research, of course. For example, we have records, for example, even menus of restaurants. Even reviews, for example, if I have a restaurant, if I am interested in food products, and then I'd like to research the reviews of customers, if we do have that in Iraq, so I'll go to restaurants and ask about the records, the reviews they are taken from customers, and then I start analyzing this data. So think about it this way: everything around me is a source of data. This is in the case of qualitative research. Now, if I have all these kinds of resources around me, so how am I going to deal with it in terms of research? So qualitative research, and remember in the past when we talked about qualitative research, we said that we have descriptive statistics and inferential statistics. Descriptive statistics it's more simpler, we can say, and in contrast, inferential statistics is more complex, and it has more things to do. I mean, things to for research. I understand that some fields of study, they think that inferential statistics will do them good, but in terms of my specialty, English language, education, linguistics, in my point of view, I think descriptive statistics will do the job. So now, what are the approaches that we can use, methods of research, when we can use in terms of qualitative research? Look here, this picture explains them, or almost all of them. We have many, but these are just examples. We have one-to-one interview. I said that we can interview people. And the interview doesn't matter if it is face-to-face, we can do it via Skype, we can do it via WhatsApp, I mean, you can do it whatever in whatever mean you have. Then we have focus groups. Again, this is a kind of interview also, but we call it a focus group. We have a group of people, and also we do this, we select them according to a scientific way, and then we call it a focus group because it represents the community. And then we start asking them questions. We have ethnographic research. We live for a certain time in a community, or I keep thinking about my specialty. I can go to a school, ask permission in order to do research in this school. So for example, I'll stay there for a whole semester, I keep watching the teacher or the student or whatever issue in my mind in order to study. I stay for a long time and then I record everything in a journal. When I finish, this is my data. So I start analyzing it. Another kind is called the case study. Case study is somehow bigger than a focus group because also I focus on a certain community, a certain group of people, and I call it case. Let me give you an example. Once I have a study about an issue related to Iraqi college students. So of course, Iraq has many universities and it has many provinces. So I'll start limiting the scope of my research and in order for me to call it a case study. So I limited it to the University of Baghdad, and then I limited it to the College of Education, and then I limited it again to the students of the English department in the College of Education. And then the other limitation is that to a certain stage in that department. So see, when I took this, I said this is a case study because it represents the University of Baghdad, which is one of the universities, the several universities in Iraq, which is in the capital, in one of the provinces. So this is a process. We have what is called record keeping. Also, it's related to archives. Some people are interested in archives, for example, or just like the example that I mentioned about restaurants. And then we have process of observation. What comes into my mind is the case of language acquisition. Linguists, they are interested in the process of acquiring language. So I remember one of my professors, she said, I did that myself. So she had, I think, a nephew at that time. So she started observing him from the early stages of his life, from the first months of his life. So the baby started getting older, and then she was observing how many words he started to pronounce at first. What is the process of his acquiring language? How did he acquire grammar, etc. So when we observe a process, it's also called, it's also qualitative research. I think the example from scientific part, scientific studies, which is closer to this, is the laboratory studies. So if we have scientific people who has, for example, who do experiments on animals, for instance, on plants, so when they observe the process of growth or the process of deterioration or progress in terms of medicine, for example, this is one kind of a qualitative research. Now, I'll start talking about each one of these processes, giving you the characteristics and some examples about it. The first kind or the first approach of qualitative research is called the narrative approach. So the narrative approach, it is mainly interviews with participants regarding a specific issue, and the researcher reflects upon them. So, and put in your mind that all these approaches may overlap with one another. For example, you can mix up case studies with narrative studies. You can mix phenomenological studies with narrative approach or case studies. But when you understand the characteristics of all these things, you will decide which name are you going to give to this approach, because the difference line is very slight, and you have to know which is the difference between each approach. So narrative approach, we do interviews with people, and the interviews will be about their experiences. Let me give you an example, and see, this is white. So when I decide, for example, to study the experiences of people in terms of, let's say, learning English. So in my mind, I say, okay, we have people who learned in English in two different ways, before 2003 and after 2003, because as you know, the curriculum was different at that time. So I say, okay, I decide the age range, and then I start looking for people who graduated from high school before 2003 and people who graduated from high school after 2003. I can make it more broad by deciding that the period after 2003 up to 2010, sorry, it's also different from after 2010 because teachers get more training and things differed broadly, technology improved, and then students get access to many native speakers, so things get totally different. So I can make it 3 stages. Then I have 3 group of people to interview, and then each one of these participants will tell me his or her experience as an English learner. I'll have a bunch of interviews. I'll transcribe them. It means that I have to translate the sound. Of course, I'll record the interview and then I'll start writing them down. And by the way, this is the only thing which is, I mean, I think it's, I can say it's a negative point against the qualitative research. It takes more time than quantitative research. That's why sometimes the person may not be a number person, but he's somehow lazy and he'd like things to get faster, so he'll choose qualitative research because he's just going to give the questionnaire or the, the survey to people and then get it back and then start working with SPSS, and that's it. Voila, the results will be there. So it's faster. While in qualitative research, no, it's a longer process. You got to interview people and then get all these sound tracks. You will sit in front of your computer, listen, and then translate them into words. And then you will start to get your hard copies of the interview and you will start to analyze the data. So somehow a longer process. Anyhow, the narrative approach is interviews, and then people will talk about their experiences. And after that, you will start, do the other stages of the research. The characteristics of the narrative studies. Number one, the researcher collects stories from individuals or documents about lived experiences. So, for example, again, it's not only interviews. I said we can use different things of the different kinds of resources. Let me give you another example. In addition to photos, we can say, let's talk about photos, for example. I can use photos to talk about, let's say, the architecture of Baghdad, the city of Baghdad. So I'll start collecting photos. I can go to museums. I can go to Al-Mutanabbi Street and then start looking for books, photo books about Baghdad in the 50s or in the 80s. And then I'll start collecting these photos and talking about them if I'm an architect, for example. I can use memoirs, diaries. This might not be applied here in Iraq, in fact, but again, it's just an idea. People who write their diaries, writers, for example, poets, I can take these diaries and then start analyzing them, and in order to collect the information about this specific experience. The second characteristic about this approach is that narrative stories can be analyzed thematically. Thematically, it means that what the person said. And I'll clarify that after I finish the point. Structurally, it means the nature of telling the story, or dialogically, who the story is directed to. Let me give you an example. In my dissertation, I'm not going to keep you busy with the theories of my dissertation, but the process of doing the research. So I interviewed a group of English instructors who work at the university, Iraqi universities. So when I interviewed them, of course, the interview will be different from the survey. The survey is straightforward. You just get to the point. You give them questions related to the topic that you are investigating. Concerning the interviews, this is different because you are facing people and you have to get them involved. So how am I going to get them involved? And in addition to that, in the survey, I have a part, if you remember, we called it demographics. The demographics, it means the age of the participant, the gender of the participant, for example, the specialty, work experience, whatever questions I need for the section of participants in my study, I'll gather the information from this part. So in terms of a qualitative study, where do I get the information for my participants? I need to explain who are they. So the information I'll get from the first part of my interview, or sometimes from other questions also. But the thing is that the first question I use in my interviews is that, tell me who you are. So define yourself. I'll get answers from several participants. And also remember that every participant will be different from the other. Maybe there will be something different, similar, but I'll get different answers and sometimes surprising answers. So I'll collect all these answers and then I have to organize them. Let's talk about the first one, thematically. So I'll create themes. Themes, for example, age, this is one theme. Let's say cultural background, let's say place of residence. So I get three, let's say, for example, three themes. And then I'll start saying that this participant said this participant said that. And then I'll start to group the answers and put them in a document in terms of these themes. Why? Because when I come to the analysis, when I start writing the study, I'll say the average age of participants was so and so. However, participant A, for example, he indicated that when he was born, there was a mistake of writing his, let's say, the month of his birth date. And I said whatever he said to me, the mistake that happened in the hospital or at home, and then I'll put a quotation out of the data that I collected. So this is a thematic analysis based on the theme. This structure, let's say the participants, one of the participants is a linguist. And he uses metaphorical language. He uses figurative language. Whenever I ask him a question, he started answering me with another question or with a metaphor. What am I going to do? Also, I'll start saying that literal language, figurative language. This is in terms of structure. And this is not happening all the time, but just for your information. Again, dialogically, sometimes people, instead of telling me the story, specifically if it is a sad story, if I interview IDPs, interior displaced people, if I go to part of the camps and then I start interview people, they might have sad stories, and instead of answering me directly, they start directing the story, let's say for the enemy, ISIS. Why did you do that? Look at this. When I say this, look at this. My kids are in the street. I live in a tent. So the speech is not directed to me. It's directed to the enemy. So I'll say that the dialogical analysis will be direct and indirect speech, etc. Another character, or this is the end, that's it, okay. Now, another approach of qualitative research, it's called phenomenological approach. From the title, it is clear that this type of research is connected to a phenomenon. If you think about this, you will say, well, this is so similar to narrative studies, because here people are talking about an issue and there people are talking about an issue. What is the difference? No, there is a difference. A phenomenon is so specific, while experience is vast. You can talk about different kinds of things. Let me give you an example. Here in this kind of study, I can say, or I can choose a topic like, what do you think about the phenomenon of um, uh, calls harassment? Calls harassment. So calls harassment, it was very popular when we had the Earthline, the desk phones. So I'll say, well, desk phones, they were very popular in the 70s, in the 80s, probably in the 90s in Iraq. So I can, this can be defined, or this can be limits my choice of the sample of the study. I'll go to people who are born, sorry, maybe let me limit myself to the 90s. They were born in the 70s, early 80s. So this will be my sample. And then they'll talk about this phenomenon, because it will be nonsense to choose people who were born after 2003 and ask them about phone harassment. Maybe they can talk about it, but it will be very different, because now we have mobile phones. We can track people very easily, but in the past it was difficult and the situation was different. So it's up to me, but again, this is a phenomenon. It happened once in a time. Or let me give you another example, and I used it before in the previous sessions. If I ask people, what do you think about the phenomenon of torn trousers? Do you like them? Don't you like them? Why? If I have brothers, if I have sons, for example, and they, or even daughters, they wear these trousers. This is a phenomenon, and it appeared lately. So I can use my sample to talk about this phenomenon. They will not give me details about their experiences, about their, I mean, let me put it another way, about their life experiences. No, about this experience in particular. So this is the difference between phenomenological approach and narrative approach. Then what are the characteristics of this approach? First, as I said, it's an exploration of a phenomenon. And for the participants, please don't forget to sign your names. I'll post the, where is it? I'll post the link for the exploration of a phenomenon. The second one, it's related to the way that we are going to gather data. So the sample is a group of individuals who have all experienced the phenomenon. For example, I cannot go to, let me give you another example, to a woman in Najaf, and she has no kids, she has no relatives, and then ask her about young people who wear trousers. She may give me something, but it is not rich. Maybe she saw a person, or I suspect that they'll see people wearing torn out trousers in Najaf. So yeah, again, I'll not get any data, because the city, the situation of the city is different. The situation of the woman herself is different, and she has no relatives who wear these kinds of clothes. So it will be nonsense. The sample should be group of individuals who have all experienced the phenomenon. The third characteristic is that sometimes the researcher has to discuss personal experiences with the phenomenon, and this applies to all kinds of qualitative research. We said that the researcher in this approach is part of the research process, whether we like it or not. So we get people involved, we can get people talk about their experiences, and we are part of the process also. So we have to give our points of view. If not to the participants, then on paper, on our study. 4, interviewing is the basic way of collecting data, but documents can be used as well. The way of collecting. if you see here, we said that there should be an overlap between all these methods. So there are similarities between all the approaches, but the difference line is so light. You have to recognize the difference. Again, I think the most similar thing, the common thing between all these approaches is the way we collect data. We use interviews, we use documents, we use photographs, and this applies to almost all of these approaches. Another approach of doing the research is called grounded theory approach. And I have to elaborate on this idea because, again, we have a misunderstanding about the hypotheses we use in our research studies, the theories that we use in our research studies, because there is a misunderstanding. And I'm sorry to all the Iraqi researchers, but we have to clarify this. Grounded theory approach is one approach of qualitative research method. This grounded theory approach, it means that we'll start from bottom up. The misunderstanding in Iraq is that whenever I have a study, especially when we write theses and dissertations, is that we have a section called hypothesis, and we hypothesize something. Let me tell you something. Hypotheses, they are used in quantitative research, specifically with inferential statistics, because we think about variables and we hypothesize something. This variable will raise the expectancy of this phenomenon. It will happen this way. It will raise it. So I hypothesize something and I have to prove myself. Then I do the statistics. It might give me the same result. It might not. And then I have to talk about the variables. Why did I get this result? This is the hypothesis. It doesn't work for all kinds of studies. It is not a matter of form. So, and this is for graduate students also, I hope that they will understand this. The way we write our dissertations and theses, it's not a norm. It's not a fact that we should follow it. And I have to confess, I did it myself. I didn't know how to write, so I started gathering MA theses, and then I started looking how the sections that they organized them, and then I followed them blindly, which is not right. The thing is that I should write whatever beneficial to me, whatever useful for my writing. I should have an idea and I build the things on paper. It doesn't work this way. It's not slots and then I fill them out. No. So that's kind of research. We have the hypothesis and then we start proving it. Grounded theory, it's the opposite. I study a phenomenon. Sometimes I can look at how things are played. I can start by doing a phenomenological study, for example. I study a phenomenon and then I gather all this data. I start collecting data, I start analyzing data, and then I say, build a hypothesis. And then I say, okay, this is a phenomenological grounded theory approach. I put it in the title. See, even my title differed. So this is the way. I start by doing, well, I said this because this is the creativity of the researcher. But a grounded theory, it has its own norms. So its own way of doing things. We start collecting data from the big picture, and then we narrow it until we get a theory. We call it grounded theory approach. This kind of research, we use it if we have a big picture and we don't know what is the result. For example, I'd like to study an issue in the community, and I have a vast number of people who experience this phenomenon. And then I start collecting all this data, I start analyzing them thematically, structurally, dialogically. Then I come up with this theory because it's important for my study, not randomly, not give any theory, no. Just if it is important to my field of study. So you have to be very careful when you choose one of these approaches based on the need of the field of study. The characteristics of grounded theory is that memoing. So a lot of memoing. We have to write ideas as data are collected. So we collect data and then memoing, a lot of writing. It is part of developing the theory. Then interviewing also. Again, I'm not going to say this again, but interviewing, photographs, archives, documents, everything applies to all approaches of qualitative research. We have another kind of research, which is ethnography. Let me give you my point of view. Ethnography, we can do it as a study, short study, but in fact, ethnographical studies, they are more suitable for books because they take a very long time in order to do. They take a very long time to collect data. So we have to live, just like the example I gave you, going to a school and spending a term or a year or half a year in order to observe the teacher, to observe the students. So half a year is a very long time, and then I'll get a pile of notes. If I go to a community and stay for, let's say, a year in order to notice things, it will be a pile of notes. It will be a waste if I use it only to give one very short study. So it's very suitable for books. So again, let's see here, ethnographical research, it focuses on the social behavior of an entire culture sharing group. Again, I'm not going to say I'll stay for a year with Karkh people in Baghdad and then start to, whoever comes from Rasafa will enter to the study. No, I'll have to be very specific. I should use the cultural specific criteria in order to create my sample. Let me give you an example. There was a book written by an American lady in the 50s. This is a very good example of an ethnographical study. She came with her husband to stay for 2 years in one of the villages in the south of Iraq. He was doing his MA research in terms of agriculture and watering, and she was staying with him. They discussed her stay and they said, okay, I'm going to stay here for 2 years. It will be a waste of time if I'm not going to write about my experience. So she started gathering data in order to come up with an ethnographical study. In fact, she started by writing her diary, and it turned out to be an ethnographical study. What she did is that she was living in the community, which makes her inside the world. So she's very suitable for qualitative studies. She started mixing with the community. She started visiting families, seeing their culture, seeing their traditions. She attended their religious and cultural events, weddings, funerals, other religious events, and then she started taking notes. She noticed births. So within her study, look what she came up with. Women's life, men's life, traditions of both women and men, religious activities, cultural activities, food traditions. She talked even about politics, political perspectives of people. She talked about differences, life in the capital, life in the village, everything, even the agricultural situation. She explained everything. So the information, rich information she gave us, which we Iraqis, we don't know. Very nice. So this is a very good example of ethnographical studies. That's why I said it's more suitable for books rather than short studies. We can do short studies, but books with ethnographical research, they are very rich and they'll add a lot to the field of study. The characteristics of this kind of research, look here. So it extends contact within a given community. You should be part of that community in order to do an ethnographical study. I cannot sit on my desk and then start, gathering just information from books, and I say that I did an ethnographical study about this area in Iraq, let's say, by reading the books about, let's say, Mosul, okay? I gathered books and information and started writing and said, well, this is an ethnographical study. No, this is not a full ethnographical study. This is a literature review because I gathered information from books. It's true, I can use these documents, I can use these books in order to enrich my study. But again, where's my part? This is not a qualitative research. I should be part of that community. I should go there, spend the time. If it is a short study, I can go there for a month, stay for a month, and mix with the families to live myself the experience, to see how they do things. What is the perspective of an outsider? What is the perspective of the people themselves? This is the ethnographical study. Another characteristic is the researcher should pay attention to day-to-day events. Again, what I said. If we live there and then unexpectedly there is something odd happened, I should mention it also. This is very odd and it happened once. Why? What are the reasons? What is the effect? What is the impact that this thing brought to people? All of these things. It is just like you are telling about the life of the community. Again, it will be that you are taking notes all the time. So you have to participate directly or indirectly in local events. Directly to see what's going on, and indirectly if you are just watching. Then, 4, research tools are less structured. Just like what I said, I can use books, I can use documents, but with ethnographical study, the sky is the limit because I'm studying a whole community. So I have many resources around me. I cannot limit myself. I should attend events. I should go to different places. I should go to house visits. I should be involved in the community. That's why it is less structured. The narrative studies, for example, they are very structured because we have to interview people person to person. So we say this is a very structured way. We have to have pre-prepared questions. Whereas in ethnographical study, I should not go in the community holding my paper and saying that, well, can I ask you this question? Can I ask you this question? No, I am living the experience, and then the questions will just pop out, will spring from nothing. So whenever I see something, I should ask about it and then write it. Then the 5th characteristic, observation. It should be purposeful. If I have this vast scope for data, it doesn't mean that I should go randomly. No, it means that you should remember the basics of research, that we talked about it. We have research questions, we have limitations of the study, we have the topic itself. This is the limits. This is our limits. So when we observe, we should observe these things, not randomly. And 6, the ethnographic study, it develops complete description of the culture. Again, the same idea of a group such as the rituals, the customary social behavior, or regularities. So we are going to talk about all of these things in ethnographical studies. Case study, it is similar to phenomenological study. It is similar to ethnographical study, but it is very limited. If I study a whole community, in case studies, I'll study a specific group. If I'm going to stick with the community of the society, I'm going to study a specific group. Let me give you an example. Let's say I'd like to study the rituals of Iraqis in Ramadan. If I would like to do this as an ethnographical study, I have to live the month in, let's say, in 4 or 5 provinces. So I have to spend, let's say, two provinces. So either I divide the month 15, 2 weeks and 2 weeks. So 2 weeks in one province, 2 weeks in another province, and then I start doing my research. If it is a case study, I say no, I'd like to do a case study. So because we have different groups of people in each province, and each one of these groups have their rituals. I'll say no. I'll go to Rahmaniya and stay the whole month there in order to see the rituals of Baghdadis in Ramadan. Or I'll go and spend the whole month any area in Rasafa, and then stay there for a whole month. Let's say Sheikh Omar, and stay there for a month and see the rituals of people in Ramadan. This is a case study because it's not the whole province, it's only a specific group in this province. So this is a case study. The study of a case within a real life setting. Again, see, when I say the study of a case within real life setting, you might say, well, this applies also to ethnographical studies, but this is the difference. Case study is smaller, ethnographical study is bigger, phenomenological study is also bigger, but see the hierarchy here. We have ethnography, it's on top, then phenomenology, and then we have case study. Each one of them is smaller than the other. Characteristics of case studies. The case to be studied may be an individual, a small group, an organization, or a project. See here, the case is not only applicable to community. We can have this group of people. We can have one person also. For example, if I'd like to talk about something related to engineers who has the experience of studying abroad, getting their PhD abroad, and what impact they get from knowledge outside, and they brought it here to Iraq. So I can say, well, my sample consists of one engineer from the Ministry of, do we have a ministry for engineers? Anyway, from the Union of Engineers. I think we have Union for all engineers. So this person, I chose him as to be my case study. So I start interviewing him, and then he'll talk to me about this particular topic. This should be, I mean, this can be considered a case study. A small group, just like what we said, and an organization. When I talked about my example earlier, I said I can use a specific stage in a certain department, in a certain college, in the University of, or maybe I can make it a little bigger. Sorry. I can say my case study is the University of Baghdad itself, all colleges, all departments, in order to investigate the experience of students or teachers in terms of e-learning. This is also a case study. Or a project. It's also, I mean, it can be also a project. When I talk about a certain experiment, let me give you an example. The experiment of Skinner in terms of behavior, the reward and punishment. If I'd like to investigate this experiment and I do it myself, it's also a case study. I'm sorry, here there is a mistake, typing mistake. Ethnographic study is case study instead of it. So the characteristics of case studies. Number one, data can be collected in various ways. Since it's similar to ethnographical studies, to phenomenological studies. So data collection is similar among all these types of approaches. Case studies, they involve interactions, communications, relationships, and practices between the case and the wider world, or vice versa. Again, it's similar. We said that the person whom we are going to interview is part of a bigger community, bigger society. So when he's going to transfer his experience, he is going to relate that to his experience with the world itself. Data may be collected over an extended period of time or an intense period of time. It depends. If you are using one person as a sample, you can have the interview in one session, or maybe that person, he's busy, he got an appointment, an emergency, so you cut the interview and then you get back to him later. So it depends. If it is a small group of people, then you have to stay with that group of people to see all of them, to live with them in order to do the research. So it will extend the time. Again, it depends. I think I'll stop here because we spent almost an hour wandering among these approaches. Next time, we'll continue talking about qualitative research. Now, the floor is yours. Do you have any question, comment, or concern, or suggestion? And please don't forget to sign up your names in the attendance sheet. I'll post the, sorry.